So they decided to create separate jurisdictions under white leadership in various dioceses where they existed, and they would be totally disenfranchised from the work of the church. So this was to come up at the 1883 General Convention, and they made it into a canon. Black people clearly were not on the floor of the General Convention at the time. But Alexander Crummell, then the rector of St. Luke's, Washington, organized people to lobby, as it were, their white friends on the floor, and they got this canon defeated narrowly. It was defeated because it passed in the it was defeated in the House of Deputies, but it passed in the House of Bishops. The bishops, exceeding wroth, were very upset, and so they couldn't get away with this on a national basis. So when they got back to their dioceses, they instituted the same programs locally that they couldn't do nationally. And that meant that colored convocations were formed. And it meant that St. Ambrose, for instance, would not sit in the convention of the diocese, but would meet with other black congregations in kind of a make-believe convocation instead. That wasn't just ancient history. The last such convocation sat in 1953. Now, after decades of debate, two priests were consecrated as bishops suffragan for colored work in 1918. Edward Thomas Demby, Archdeacon for colored work in the Diocese of Tennessee, and Henry Beard Delaney, who held the same office in the Diocese of North Carolina. Delaney, who had spent virtually his entire ministry at St. Augustine's, was 60 years old at the time of his consecration, and the duties of his office took a heavy toll on him, and he died after 10 years in office. Demby, on the other hand, served his post until 1939 and was active until his death in 1957. The Suffragan for Colored Work plan began and ended with these two men. There was such controversy over their elections among blacks in the Episcopal Church. They were called suffering bishops, and even deaf and dumb bishops, because they weren't really allowed to say much. Bragg, in a not too veiled reference to them, opined that a black man must be chosen for the episcopate with respect to his real ability, and not chiefly because he was a good and safe Negro. Interestingly enough, the experience mirrored that of Samuel Crowther, Anglicanism's first bishop, consecrated with work in Nigeria some years before. But his royal patent specified that he exercised his ministry beyond the Queen's domains. That is, outside of any area where there were white Englishmen. So Crowther could only be limited to ministry to indigenous Nigerians. So there's something consistent about Anglicanism after all. While eviscerated by virtue of their limited office, all these bishops nonetheless possessed the dignity of the episcopate. To objectors to the plan, its defenders observed that it was a stepping stone of sorts, and pointed out that it was easier to attain admission to the first-class carriage of a train from the second-class carriage than it was to make a perilous flying leap into the first-class section from the side of the tracks. Demby, shortly before his retirement, spoke against the missionary district plan, which had been proposed yet again. He said, "If the request for a missionary district is passed, it will be the greatest setback to our Negro work that it has ever had. We want Negro bishops, but as suffragans working as assistants to the diocesan's helpers to the diocesan bishops." He got his wish and more. There was never again to be a suffragan bishop for colored work. The next black bishop elected for work in the United States was John Melville Burgess, a suffragan of Massachusetts, who later became the first black diocesan bishop in the United States, something Demby could not have envisioned. Nor could he have envisioned that nearly a century after his own consecration, that a black man, a successor to Bishop Atkinson of North Carolina, could be mentioned as a potential candidate for the office of presiding bishop. Before his election, as Barack Obama was embroiled in the Jeremiah Wright controversy, candidate Obama delivered a brilliant speech on racism. It centered on the legacy of slavery, the fact that America and American history has been tainted, influenced, adversely affected by the fact of the nefarious institution of slavery, and that it was a way of life in these United States. It's an old Latin proverb, talis patria, qualis ecclesia. As the nation goes, so goes the church. It is because of the legacy of slavery that I could be asked as I entered seminary, Mr. Lewis, did it ever occur to you that the Episcopal Church doesn't particularly like you? It is because of the legacy of slavery that there were no positions in my diocese of Long Island for me to fill upon graduation from seminary. It was because of the legacy of slavery that even when I was elected to an all-white parish in Pittsburgh, the Post-Gazette, must have been a slow news day, on its first page said, "White parish calls black rector." It is because of the example of slavery that, and the history of slavery, that placards protesting the murder of black men by white policemen read "Black Lives Matter," because we come out of a society in which they didn't matter at all. The church's attempts at black evangelism was awakened. You're there. I'm sorry. The church's attempt at evangelizing blacks was awkward because it tried to fling out the banner. It tried to sing, "O Zion, haste thy message high fulfilling," while assuming at the same time that blacks were inferior and that was a given. It is only by removing this assumption from the equation that we might be faithful in building up a kingdom where there is no Jew nor Greek, no slave nor free, but that we're all one in Christ Jesus. Thank you very much.